Good morning. Welcome back to another episode of Catapult Your Career, where we delve into the reality of various roles and explore practical advice for numerous professions. And today, the podcast is very much centered on a different topic, and that's in terms of the world of a sports writer. And I know many people, including myself and others, have always wanted, if we couldn't be a sportsman, what's the next best thing we can do is to get into that. And I thought of none other than a really good friend to invite to the episode today to speak about the world of being a sports writer in Joe. So how are you, Joe?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for coming and joining us today.
No problem.
And I suppose without further ado, would you like to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and perhaps your background?
Yeah, sure. So, do you want me to go through all the roles, or just a little bit of an overview?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Go through a little bit of a potted history of some of the past roles and things you've done to come to where you are today.
Sure. So, I obviously leaving school, I studied broadcast journalism at Salford University, and I quickly realised that I didn't want to become a broadcast journalist. Um, so, I obviously left uni, got a part-time job at a retail shop, and then from there I managed to get my first break in one of a local magazine, and I've sort of built my career
Mm,
up there really, and I've done kind of various bits of experience while at uni and while out of uni, and I've sort of found my way to the world of sports journalism, which is, I guess, ultimately what I wanted to be anyway. So yeah, I've kind of done the long-winded approach, but yeah, I feel like I've got there in the end.
definitely. And it's interesting. You mentioned you did broadcast journalism at university, and you kind of very quickly realised, no, that this is perhaps not something I want to do. What is perhaps the difference between I suppose what you do now in terms of a sports writer and broadcast journalism?
So broadcast journalism is really to do with TV and radio. So I kind of went into uni thinking I'd love to do something, being maybe a presenter in a TV show or a presenter in radio, and I kind of built that up in my head that that's really what I wanted to do. But it's not till, I guess this is the kind of one of the benefits of, I guess, being able to go to uni, is that you can try these things and kind of figure out other paths that go along with it. So I then found, when being in front of a camera or being in front of a radio mic, that actually it really wasn't something I wanted to do. So I kind of just chose every other, I don't know what you'd call them, like avenues within the course. You could pick, radio, or you could pick, say, to do something else like music journalism. And I chose sports journalism as one of them, and found that actually I prefer the writing side of things to broadcasting. Um, So
Mm,
yeah, it was just a case of trial and error, really. I kind of went in there with the idea that, yeah, it'd be great to do presenting, but actually when you try it, I thought, it's not really for me. So I'm glad I found out then, I
yeah,
guess, rather than 10 years into an industry that I didn't want to be in.
no, it's fair, and I think you've kind of highlighted a key point there anyway, where, we might have an idea or an ambition to do something, but it's actually important to trial these things. And it's really good that you had that opportunity to have that experience to actually do it. And then kind of pivot from there, I suppose. And even if people are, I suppose, wanting to transition careers, I think that's why I often tell people, rather than just kind of quitting their jobs and going to go into it straight away, there's even opportunities like volunteering, where you might have volunteer opportunities where you could do the job you might want to transition into, and you'll very quickly, within a couple of hours or even a day or two, realise if that's something you actually want to do.
Oh,
And
definitely.
I'm wary of your sports journalism bit. You did quite a few cool things. I think you kind of went to rugby clubs and a few other bits and bobs. Could you tell us more about some of the bits you did initially when you were at university?
Yeah, of course. So I guess the broadcasting first of all started when I did hospital radio. So I was doing that kind of side of
Mm,
things and thought, this is great. But then it's not until you get into, say, uni environment where they say, "Oh, here are the kind of technical things that you need to do," that I kind of then felt maybe this isn't for me. But I actually got the opportunity, first of all, to a few of us while at uni were offered the chance to become I kind of called it like a multimedia intern at a Sale Sharks rugby club.
Mm.
So I would go there with a camera, interview one or two players, and then come back, and then me and some of the guys would then edit the video and send it to the club, and then they put it on their YouTube channel. So that was great because I
Mm.
was only 19 then, and you're kind of interviewing Danny Cipriani was at Sale Sharks back then. So to be able to say, you've got that experience to do that as well, it was just amazing. And yeah, that went really well. That led to another project I did with the Salford Reds, so the rugby league club. And then from there, I met a guy who worked for Sky, and he was like, "Oh, come and do some little freelancey bits there." So it's kind of, I guess, throughout all of this, it's all about kind of finding these connections and just kind of building up a little network, I guess. From there, I got an opportunity to do some intern work with Skiddle, who sell a little bit like a kind of Ticketmaster, I guess, but they also do like reviews. So I did some reviews for them, album reviews, music reviews, gig reviews. And then I think that was kind of one of my last experiences at uni. And then obviously you've got the summer to, before you kind of think, oh, maybe I'll, try and look for a job. And I thought, well, what I'd do is I kind of planned this little 3 months where I'd go and do some work experience. So I knew someone that worked for Hearst at the time, who's a kind of a magazine company that owns Esquire magazine. So I spent 4 weeks with them. And in the same building was Men's Health magazine. So I kind of then just plodded upstairs and said, would you guys, take me on for a week? So I got some experience there as well. And whilst doing all of this, it's a bit much. I kind of just had a search on Twitter and just sort of thought, I'll see what other writing jobs are out there. So I just typed in looking for a writer or something like that, hoping someone would post it. And I found loads of people who were creating blogs for musical sport, and then just dropped them a message saying, I'm just looking to get some exposure, just some kind of practice in writing. And then, it was quite a small, it would only be me, the guy who created it, and say 3 other people. But it just helped me to build up my portfolio, is probably the wrong word, but experience, I guess, to create all these articles and keep going. So I kind of tried to cover all bases. I kind of thought, I've got an interest in sports, so I tried to do every kind of sports thing available to me at the time at uni. But I also love music, so I thought, why not write about that as well? And that's kind of all my, I guess, volunteering, really, until I then got my first job.
Yeah, and it thank you for kind of sharing that with Joe. And I think if the biggest thing for me there, for people who are listening, is actually just how proactive you've been. And we sometimes we do university degrees and we think, right, we just come out of university and that's it. We should kind of walk into a job and all the rest of it, but it's not. That's not the reality of the world we live in, unfortunately. And the amount of kind of opportunities you've reached out to, you've built up your kind of network and you built up your contacts, you've built up experience, you've got, real household names, even for people like me who are not in that world. No, we all know who Men's Health is, it's a very kind of household name. And you obviously mentioned freelance pieces for the person who you met kind of via Sky. I think it's just really important, especially when you're thinking to even transition careers, is you kind of take for granted your kind of raft of network and contacts already, and kind of utilising them to kind of have that transition and say, right, do you know anybody who's in this industry? It might be a friend of a friend. You might just follow them on a weekend and do a couple of days volunteering. And then all of a sudden, when you do that volunteering, you meet someone else, and it's like a chain of events, isn't it? It's like a chain of reactions. And I suppose that's kind of giving you had a real good varied history and experience of kind of the music, the sport, and that allowed you to really understand what aspects you enjoy most and ultimately allow you to kind of secure your first job. I suppose in terms of now what we're talking about this wider episode, in terms of a sports writer and trying to help people who perhaps want to enter that same profession, I suppose the obvious thing for us is to describe what actually is a sports writer. What would you say a sports writer does or is?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way to explain it is that there are lots of different types of obviously sports writing. So you can either go down into a really niche, say just football or just rugby or whatever, or you can go even smaller and go into just one club. Some people even do it to just one player. So you could have like someone that just writes about everything that Ronaldo does. But what I do is at the moment, I kind of search for stories, things that are happening within the world of sporting. So at the moment, I'm doing stuff for kind of a US audience in a way. So I'll be searching for stories that relate to kind of a US audience in a way, but obviously in the world of sport. Say if the Tyson Fury fight that's coming up, that's kind of, that's got obviously a global angle. And then I'll find that story and then write it up essentially and kind of explain to the audience what's happening, all the key information you need, a bit of background as well. And yeah, that's kind of it really. Just trying to be it's kind of marrying that line of being informative and entertaining as well. So you kind of want to get out there exactly what the story is. But also, whilst you're here, here's Tyson Fury say last fight and, how's he been doing recently? What else has he been up to? So that's kind of how it works in a nutshell.
No, I like it. I like it. And you kind of started to delve a little bit into this, but it's interesting because I always talk about like the activities of jobs. So sometimes we will see a job that we want to do because it's high prestige and, everyone thinks if you're that job is successful and all the rest of it. And you try and aspire to do that. And then when you get into the job, you realise the reality of it. Like 95% of the tasks you do are absolutely like boring in terms of what you actually enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think like sometimes we chase the prestige of a role rather than actually the enjoyment of what the role entails. So I always ask people, and it's interesting to know for yourself, like if I was to ask you what does like an average week look like for a sports writer? What are some of the tasks, the activities that you do from, a day to day?
So I guess a day to day is kind of a little bit like I said. Really, it's logging on, seeing what else is out there. I mean, it's not so much like you're always sort of on call, but it's always good to keep an eye out on what's going on anyway. You don't want to say go on holiday and then come back and then a Tyson Fury fight's been announced for a week and then you think, oh wow, this is great. Have we done this? And then obviously it's a week later than everyone else. So it's kind of outside of work, you're keeping up on what's going on constantly. And then when you log in every day, it's seeing what's doing well. You often look at, say, other companies and what they're doing, other publications, what's doing well for them, just to kind of get a feel of, how things are going, what's performing well, what kind of, if there's anything you've missed as well. And then once you're kind of finding these stories, then writing them up, and then it's just kind of on to the next one, really. And then I know it's not particularly glamorous, but you sort of keep finding the stories, keep writing them, and then cracking on to the next one. There are obviously other opportunities to do different things as well. I've had before invites to games where you can go and attend them and write them up. So it can be quite varied. It's not just sat here writing story after story. You can go to a game and write something up about that. You get press releases through saying, I had one a while back that some rugby players were going to a pub to promote some beer. And you can go, great, I'll go down there and then speak to 3 rugby players. And, you can get a few stories out of that. I think I spoke to them about their fitness regimes and it made me feel how incredibly unfit I am. But you can vary it up a bit. So it's not the same thing. You can get out and about.
No.
Yeah. So you can switch it up a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something that makes me giggle, the irony of talking to rugby players and their fitness regime whilst launching beer.
Yeah.
there's something not, I don't know, there's something not right there. But
yeah,
no,
they didn't. I don't know if they. I don't know if they ever drank the beer, but yeah, they.
No.
Yeah, they kind of put everyone in the room to shame with all their gym work.
I bet. I bet. And it's interesting what you said about that. You know, there's definitely like a consistency element here. So like, you know, you always got to be, you know, in terms of in terms of the market, in terms of different opportunities, different news stories, different articles. You know, for instance, I know what you mean in terms of big stories. Like obviously it's dated now, but Messi joining into Miami, like that would have been a massive story. You need to be on that straight away. How you know, I suppose a slightly more kind of personal question than perhaps though is like, how do you switch off though, and how do you kind of, because I suppose it's quite consistent, isn't it? And it's almost like you can't take a holiday off, and you see this with other sports writers that I follow, people like Matt Law, because I myself I follow Chelsea, and he does a lot to do with Chelsea Football Club, and you can see even jokes in terms of like, he goes on that annual leave and he's like, well, that's my leave done when we like announce a new signing or something like that. So how do you kind of deal with that in terms of resting and kind of that, I suppose, getting off that constant grind of it?
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting one because obviously with an interest in sport, you are kind of reading these things anyway. So you're obviously kind of keeping up to date with things. But it does get to, I guess, a point where you then kind of already know everything. So say if not in like a, as in like, obviously you can't know everything to do with everything that's going on, but with like the Messi story, we've been covering that a lot. So then at the end of the day, if I see something crop up and it says, oh, Messi's done this, you kind of, as a fan, you then look at that and think like, oh, wow, what's he done now? Whereas obviously because you've been writing it all day, you're like, oh, well, you know, I know that's going on and whatever. So it can be a bit, I don't want to say it takes the enjoyment out of it, because you'll never lose that enjoyment out of sport. But it does sort of, I don't know, it can take something a little bit away from it. Just the fact that you're so up to date with all these things that when something does happen, it's a little bit like I kind of describe it as a football transfer. If a transfer came out of the blue and they say Chelsea have signed whoever, you think, oh, wow, that's great. But when it's been teased for a month before, when it does get announced, you're obviously like, well, we all kind of knew this was happening anyway. So when you keep on top of things all the time, you know that this is going to happen. So yeah, it does kind of take the surprise element out of things a bit. But then you kind of go on the opposite, and when there's a live sports game going on, obviously you can't predict that. So there's always exciting things going on there. So it's kind of a bit of a balancing act, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I, again, talking about Chelsea, like the Pochettino talks, I mean, we kind of knew Pochettino was coming to Chelsea almost like 3 months before. And it was like, once it finally got announced, I was like, thank goodness I won't see a news article again. So
yeah, exactly. It's like the worst kept secret.
I completely, Exactly. I completely understand what you're saying. And just touching more on what you said, is because it's interesting. Like, you've almost touched on some of the most enjoyable things about being a sports writer and some of the least enjoyable things. What are some others you say that are like the highs and lows of the job, you would say?
I guess a good example is that when a big sporting event happens, you kind of look at it in two ways now. So say, for instance, you think it's obviously, you know, the Messi story, for example. When that broke, it's always like, wow, brilliant, you know, he's officially signed, fantastic. But then you've also got that other bit of your mind that comes in and you're thinking, well, now what have I got to do, you know, to write about this, or how am I going to cover this?
Yeah.
So you kind of have that little bit of, like, say, for instance, at the World Cup, I remember I was covering that, and you're thinking, this final is amazing. But you're obviously not kind of sat there as a fan going, this is amazing. You're thinking, right, because that's happened, now I've got to, you know, focus on this and do this, this, and this. So you kind of almost train your brain in a way. If I looked at my phone now and saw, I don't know, Ronaldo had rejoined Manchester United for some bizarre reason, I wouldn't be thinking, wow, that's incredible. I'd be thinking, right, how are the guys covering this? Like, what's kind of the best way we can do that? So you kind of have that mindset where you can still enjoy things, but you're also thinking, yeah, but you kind of always bring it back to work in a way. Which can be interesting.
And there's an element of like presence in the moment. It's really interesting for for like our listeners, I suppose, who are potentially wanting to enter that career, because you do think, oh, it's just like it's just a jolly. You can just like watch the game and it's fun and all the rest of it. But actually, it's almost hard to be present in the moment. You can't just be present and just enjoy it for what it is, because you're always having your professional brain like working in the background, thinking, oh, okay, there was a controversial red card, so I have to make sure that's noted, and that I've got to write a piece about that. And that referee has a track record of giving red cards against that team, so I can put that into my piece, and that's another angle.
Yeah.
And you can't just sit there and go, that ref's a so-and-so, what's he doing? And then just move on with the rest of the game. So it's really interesting to get that extra insight, I suppose, from someone who's there, for people who are interested in it.
We had it at the Mail was a big one, sorry, just to say, like, when we were covering games, you do like a little kind of graphic picture of, say, like a goal that's just happened. But obviously you're kind of live tweeting a game as well. So you're not kind of, people would then say, oh, did you see, I don't know, Messi's incredible bicycle kick? And you'd be like, yeah, I think I've seen every single angle of this bicycle kick, because you're having to live tweet the game and then go, right, okay, I'll kind of get the shots for this and create a bit of a graphic on this of the bicycle kick. So you are constantly, thinking about how am I going to kind of get this out to an audience? And like you said, with the whole holiday thing, it's weird to, say, be on holiday and say, oh yeah, Pochettino's joined Chelsea. That's nice. Whereas you can then go, Pochettino's joined Chelsea. Right, okay, I guess they're going to kind of cover this, and then they'll probably be wanting fan reaction to that. And it's just kind of, you sometimes step back and think, like, how everyone else views this information compared to how you do, I guess, when you cover it.
No, definitely. And it's interesting. Obviously, you're now in the role. You now have that kind of live experience, and you're, covering various kind of live sporting events. I'm wondering, what are some of the perhaps the past experiences you think have helped you transition to this role? Obviously, you've done lots of volunteering and lots of kind of being very proactive in reaching out for opportunities. But I'm just wondering, for people who perhaps want to follow a similar path, what are some of like the past experiences you think have helped you personally to kind of get to where you are now?
Yeah, that's a good one, because I didn't have the easiest journey. I was working, like I said, in retail at the time, and I must have applied for, not wanting to be dramatic, it must have been about 60, 70 jobs over the course of, say, 2 years. But the problem is, it's a lot of, you need experience to get the job, but obviously they're not kind of, or, you need, they require job experience to get the job, but obviously they're not willing to give you the job until you have the experience, or however it goes.
Exactly.
So I then joined a local kind of magazine after like however many times of applying for all these jobs, and that was kind of my break, really. And that kind of really taught me how to kind of build things, I guess, from quite a small audience upwards. And then I joined Reach, the kind of company there, and I was doing stuff in the Essex Live offices as a commercial writer. So that was kind of writing about, clients would come to you and say, oh, we've got this product, and then you'd kind of write a feature around it, and then like an advertorial feature, sorry. But to get that kind of that break in sport, it's kind of just about taking your chances, really, and knowing kind of where you. It's tough because it's a bit knowing where you want to be heading, but also it's just a bit of luck, really. At the end of the day, you could apply for a job, and then 200 people could apply for the same role, and they say, well, we'll only look at the top, say, first 100 candidates that came through, because we can't look at everything. And if you're, say, candidate 101 that replied, you miss out on that, and it's horrible. But you just need that kind of opportunity to get your foot in the door somewhere, really. So sorry, I think I've rabbited on and forgot the question.
No, not at all, not at all. I think in terms of your, you shared some really valuable kind of past experiences, and I think something that, knowing you, and you perhaps almost underplayed in your answer, is the resilience that you need. Like, you've applied for umpteen different jobs, and you might think, actually, you know what, it's not for me. It's not going to happen. And I whenever you listen to any podcast, Diary of a CEO is obviously the one I always talk about in terms of the biggest kind of footfall. But any podcast, when you listen to very what we deem as successful people in terms of society, the two common traits I always talk about is they always show a level of consistency and a level of curiosity. So they're always curious. They never think they know everything. They're always wanting to learn more. They're always wanting to expand, but they're always consistent. And again, consistency, such a broad term, it underpins that resilience. So, you need to be, yes, you apply for a job. Okay, you didn't get it. What, you're just going to forget? Are you going to leave it?
Yeah.
No, you're consistent. You keep doing, right, I'm going to apply for another one. I'm going to apply for another one. And I even like how, essentially you're trying to be directionally correct. So you might not know where I want to be in 10, 15 years time, but roughly I want to be around that place.
Yeah.
So in order to get roughly there, I need to take this step just to be directionally correct. I'm just going to aim in the right direction. And again, I suppose we've thrown out various terms here now, and you even, again, from what you said, you've almost all reverse engineered the process. So like you said, this is roughly where I want to get. This is roughly the direction I need to take to get to that place. Okay, what is the absolute smallest step I need to take? And is it just working for the smallest newspaper magazine that I can find? Okay, that's the very smallest step of one of 100,000 steps. I do that. I then build an offering. I build a presence. Then someone else reaches out to me, and then that's got 50 readers. Then all of a sudden I've got 100 readers, and now I'm building up my experience. I've got I'm putting money in the bank. I've now built my expertise as a writer. So first and foremost, I'm seen as a writer. Now I can now start to think, this is great, but now I want to get more into sport. And you start to kind of piece over to that place. So I think there's so many good lessons that you shared in terms of you don't always need to know exactly what you want to do in 10, 15 years time. I think if anything, if you were to ask someone that question, it actually paralyzes you because you think, bloody hell, I don't know what I want to do tomorrow, let alone like 15 years away. But if you know roughly the direction you want to take, you can start taking some small steps. And who knows, in a few years' time, you can just change your decision as you go down that path. So I don't know if you had any kind of reflections for when I've kind of shared back, some of the things you shared.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely rings true because I wouldn't have thought when I was at the retail job, whenever that was, say 6 years ago or whenever, that I would now be in a position like I am now. Like even when I was working as the kind of advertorial commercial writer, I then took that chance and then got a job at the Mail doing the sports coverage there. And then obviously that led me kind of back to here. And then through there, I kind of worked with someone who worked at Gold. I did some work with them. And then when you do kind of sit back and reflect on it, you do think actually that's quite a lot for someone to do. But obviously I would never have thought when I was, getting my 40th rejection email from, anything. I applied to join just another retail job at one point, just thinking I need to freshen things up, and even got rejected from that. So now I'm kind of thinking, even the jobs that I didn't want to move into, I'm now not even getting yes from that. So it can be really hard, disheartening, but you kind of got to think that, I think my problem is I'm too impatient. I think, well, I want to do this, so I need to kind of jump and do it now. But you do sometimes, just need to think these things can take 5-6 years, but if, you keep working at it, you stand a better chance than just saying, oh, I'll kind of, give it up now.
Definitely. And the more you kind of change, you change track per se, because every time you're applying for a job, although it's disheartening and it's easy for me to say, but you've done it, you've lived the experience. Every time you apply for that job, you might get feedback. You don't always do, but that'll give you 1% more chance when you're applying again.
Yeah.
And that it will just compound. It's like compound interest. That skill and that expertise in getting into a place will get slowly bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's we always overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate what we can do in 5 years. And if you I hope that message really kind of resonates with people, even with yourself. Looking back over the past 5 years, just how many barriers you've had to kind of climb, and how many perfect networking opportunities that have arisen. If you could have done that in the last 5 years, who's to say what you're going to do the next 5 years now? it's going to get even, bigger and bigger and bigger. So, it's really, I think it's really kind of inspiring, like your journey, that it's not just been, and I think it's actually better to hear, it's not a perfect journey of you just fell out of university into a grad role, straight into an editor. You had to have real trial and tribulations to get to where you are now,
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of, you've seen people that have done that. I mean, I've known people that are, say, 3 years younger than me and, say, editor roles, and they're great at what they've done, but they've had that opportunity to, say, do that. And obviously not everyone gets that. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in now. Some people, would love to do that, say, at any age of life, but yeah, everyone takes their own path. You can't, like I think you say, like, you can't judge your success by anyone else's, because you've no idea how they've, say, got to there. It just takes one lucky break for some person to get a job. For someone, you've got to apply for every job going, and then may never get there. So yeah, the comparison you can do between yourself and colleagues just never works, because you just ultimately everyone takes their own path without getting too philosophical.
No, and I mean, you're speaking my language, I suppose. So I think comparison is a thief for joy, isn't it? At the end of the day, you have no idea what a person's background is, their situation, and even if we look at others, we think, oh, they got the editor job, they got the sports writer job, they're going to Chelsea week in, week out and writing, the match reports. They, for all you know, they might be completely miserable. They might hate. Yes, they love Chelsea, but they hate the travel. They have to. They're losing money from the travel because they're not getting expenses. They haven't got various situations. But we're comparing ourselves to that one picture of a 24-hour day that they're all happy, posting at the Chelsea match. Look, I'm doing my report. And I think the only thing we should compare ourselves to is ourselves. I want to know, how was I yesterday? And if I've got a little bit better since yesterday, great. And when I say better, it could be emotionally, could be physically, could be anything. It doesn't have to be qualifications, doesn't have to be salary. It could just be someone like pulled in front of me and I didn't snap at them for once. Like, it can be absolutely anything in your life, I suppose. Definitely. So, like you said, I think it's a perfect thing to kind of share that. Don't just compare yourself to other paths. Oh, they're 25 or they're 21 and they've already done this. Compare yourself to yourself. What have you done, and what can you do? To kind of progress and go forward. And with that kind of same thought, I suppose, Joe, to kind of start to pull the episode to a close. Given what you've done, you've had a vast range of experiences. You've kind of networked with kind of hundreds, if not probably thousands, of people. If you were to give yourself a piece of advice, so younger Joe, you're already fresh faced, but if you're even more fresh faced, if you're going to give that young Joe a piece of advice before entering the industry, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, that's a good one. I think it would be to take more risks, I think. I know that's easier said than done. It's probably one of the hardest things to do is jump into something completely unknown. But I'm lucky that I have a very supportive wife who helps me to see these, obviously, like, as is, see like things that where they could potentially go. For instance, when I was looking for that sports break and I applied for the job at the Mail, I thought, I've been at this job now for, say, 3 years. Like, what if I can't do it? And I nearly kind of was like, I don't know if I've got the abilities. And then she was like, no, you can do this. You've got this. Think about what you've done here. And I go, right. And then she goes, well, this is what you'll be doing there. And it just correlates. It just matches. So then you kind of think, yeah, you know what, I will. And I feel like I could have so easily have gone, no, that's too much of a risk and whatever. But without taking that leap, I wouldn't have got to however many other jobs there. So I think it is sometimes worth trying something new. The risk isn't, for everyone. Not everyone can, obviously have the ability to, just decide, I'm going to try this. But for me personally, I guess it's less about the risk. It's more about trying to experience something new and get as much kind of varied experience as possible. And
Yeah.
pushing yourself to know that, yeah, you can
Yeah.
try something new, getting out of your comfort zone. I think that's something that I would,
Yeah.
looking back, I would say, yeah, you know what, I would do a bit more of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best piece of advice.
Perfect. Thank you. And I think that's you articulated that very well, because like risk is for it can be defined as different things for different people.
Mm.
But getting out your comfort zone is essentially that is the sole premise, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
if you don't like speaking, so you might think, okay, can I start recording myself? So do a talk and record myself on WhatsApp, and I listen to it. Okay. Can I then send that a video or an audio to a friend that I know?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I then do that to a group of friends? Can I then do it to one friend that I don't know? Can I then do something in person to a friend I know, and just slowly build it up?
Yeah.
Just keep pushing yourself. It doesn't mean you're just going to say, I want to maybe push myself out my comfort zone in terms of speaking. I'm going to enter Toastmasters and do it in front of 1,000 people. No, that's not really. You're going to do it quite like exposure therapy almost. You're going to build it up. You're going to do something small that's a little bit out of your comfort zone, then a bit more, then a bit more. Then if you did that once a week for every week of the year, 52 weeks of the year, all of a sudden you've taken 52 steps towards pushing yourself out your comfort zone. And all of a sudden you probably are doing a Toastmasters in front of 100 odd people.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really important. We as human beings are capable of so much more than we realise.
Yeah.
And we so easily, we run to embrace certain discomfort rather than the uncertainty of life. And we stay in jobs we don't like and don't get me wrong, I know there's golden handcuffs and we have to pay for bills and all the rest of it. So I'm not going to glancing over reality.
Definitely.
But we much think, I'll just stay in the job. It's not that bad. It's not that bad, We'd much rather embrace the discomfort and actually embrace uncertainty and actually say, how far can we go? And how far, what can we do? So thank you so much for your time, Joe. Thank you so much for your insight and knowledge. And hopefully that really helps the listeners who are also looking to follow in your kind of footsteps in terms of that sports writer piece. And if people want to kind of continue the conversation and connect with yourself, where would be the best place for them to do that?
Yep, so I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter is probably where I'm both most active, really. And yeah, I guess throughout my career as well, I'd always kind of was looking for people to bounce ideas off, no matter kind of what level, and just get some advice. So yeah, if people are looking for any advice, not that I'm the kind of the holy grail of any advice, but yeah, I'm more than happy just to chat to anyone about that. So yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter, just drop me a message, and I'm more than happy to have a chat.
Perfect, thank you, Jan. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes for anybody who wants to kind of connect with Joe. And like you said, we shouldn't put ourselves down in terms of our position, because, for instance, if I was, there's pros and cons to different people. Yes, if I want to be a sports writer and I reach out to Matt Law, one, what are the realistic chances of him replying to me? Two, is his advice actually as important or as realistic to me at my level, because we're so far, in terms of where he is and where I am. Sometimes, and me personally, it's actually better to reach someone who's, I say, 3 to 5 years ahead of you, per se, in terms of that path, because they will have much more tangible things and tangible advice they can actually give you, and they will help you get to that level. And then once you get to that level, they will probably have grown themselves, but you can then reach another person who's 3 to 5 years ahead of you, and you can kind of keep going and going and going. So, don't put yourself down, Joe. I think, you've shared amazing experiences of what you've done already. And I think that's important for other people as well listening, that regardless of your profession, regardless of where you want to kind of potentially go, don't feel, so many people on LinkedIn, you'll be very surprised if you reached out to them and they're 3 to 5 years ahead of you, per se. You'll be surprised how many people reply and simply just want to help. So I think that's an action for everybody who's listening. If there's a career or a passion or an interest you want to do, reach out to at least 1 or 2 people who are in that path, who are a little bit ahead of you, and you'll be surprised by the results. So thank you for your time. Thank you to all that listened today, to another episode of Catapult Your Career. And I look forward to seeing you or hearing this episode, I should say, on the next episode. Cheers, Joe. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.